There are three things you should never bring up at the dinner table: religion, politics, and Sonic the Hedgehog's Quills. Talking about Sonic's Quills is practically a banned topic on social media.
I am sick of hearing about Sonic's Quills, and I never want to hear anybody ever talk about this ever again.
Simply having an opinion on the topic is basically grounds for execution. Speak on the matter and you're guaranteed to get bombarded with at least 20 angry quote retweets or replies. These discussions usually start off with artists talking about actual character design principles and sharing their genuine opinions. And eventually, the discussion leaves its target audience and is soon flooded with dismissive takes like, mocking the idea that it's even worth thinking about. I just don't understand why this topic gets so much pushback though. Because Sonic's Quills are arguably the most important and iconic feature of his design. They're not just some random detail, they define his entire silhouette. I mean, his quills are practically the logo of the entire series. I think this is such a discussed topic because despite being such a fundamental part of his look, Sonic's quills have never been consistent. Depending on the era, the game, the animation, or the comic, his quills can range anywhere from short and stubby to this. And big surprise, these subtle and sometimes not so subtle changes can actually drastically affect how Sonic's character is perceived. This is the art of shape language, and it's an incredibly important principle in character design, because whether you consciously notice it or not, the length and shape of Sonic's quills contribute to the perception of his attitude, his personality, and even how fast he feels. Welcome to chaomix, and this is the importance of Sonic's quills. This video is brought to you by today's sponsor, boot.dev. Look, I know firsthand how daunting learning to code can be. It's an essential skill when learning to get into something like game development. I taught myself a long time ago, and honestly, I wish I had something as awesome as boot.dev back then. Boot.dev is a platform for mastering back-end development. You'll learn languages like Python, Golang, and SQL. What really makes it stick out though is that it gamifies the learning experience, giving you incentives for completing lessons like XP and rank ups. It makes the entire process actually enjoyable. It barely even feels like you're doing work. There's a ton of practical, hands-on lessons to learn from, and if you're anything like me, these are usually the best way for something to stick. These are real projects you'll be building, exactly like what you'd be doing in the actual professional field. And just FYI, the average salary of a back-end developer in 2023 in the US was over $100,000. Get ready to take your coding skills to the next level with boot.dev. You can use the link in my description right now and try some courses for free. And if you love it, make sure to use code chaomix for 25% off your first purchase, whether that be for 1 month or an entire year. Huge thank you to boot.dev for sponsoring today's video, and with all that being said, let's continue with today's episode. It's unclear whether Sonic's quills are just longer pieces of his hair or a part of his actual head shape. Like, if you shaved off his hair, would he look like this or this? Genuinely, please discuss in the comments below. I need to see what the consensus is. But there's one thing for certain. They're arguably the most iconic part of his character design. Usually, Sonic has 6 quills. You can think of them as 3 columns with 2 quills in each, with the center column being offset higher than the ones on the side. But this isn't 100% always the case, because like I said, Sonic's quills aren't completely consistent. It all starts with Sonic's original design from the classic era. In general, classic Sonic has shorter quills than some of his later iterations, and it definitely fits his more compact and round design. But there was still variation during this era depending on the artist and medium. For example, in the intro animation for Sonic CD, Sonic's quills had a slightly different shape and silhouette. Overall, there's less curve to them, giving them a more pointy and prickly look. And depending on the angle, his quills stick straight up, very Super Saiyan-esque. Definitely in line with a lot of the pointy shonen anime and manga character design tropes from the time. The Sonic OVA had a pretty similar style for the quills, and although they were less pointy, they were still pretty short with certain angles stylizing them to point straight up. Even the US had a slightly different take on Sonic's quills, stylizing them as just 3 quills in a single column mohawk formation. Yeah, honestly, you can find all sorts of weird quill shapes during this era. But the weirdest one in my opinion has to be for the European box art render for Sonic 3D Blast. Like, for Christ's sake, his quills look like they're gonna grab and then immediately drop the toy you're aiming for at the round 1 claw machine. The Adventure era would give Sonic a slight redesign, having a strong focus on flow when it came to Sonic's quills. In order to achieve this, designer Yuji Uekawa would make them longer. This would allow him to really exaggerate the curvature, and honestly, this is probably my favorite depiction of them. But this wouldn't be the last time the length of Sonic's quills would be lengthened. There were times in the comics where artists would take creative liberties when drawing Sonic. Listen, I usually love the longer quills, but you know, there's such a thing as restraint. And finally, we have modern Sonic. This version of Sonic started off with a pretty standard quill length, at least as standard as his post-adventure redesign could get. But at some point, a revision to the Sonic would be made, giving him shorter quills. An interesting decision, considering the game this design debuts in also includes classic Sonic. You'd think they'd want to try and differentiate the two characters that already look almost exactly the same as much as possible, but what do I know? Sonic's quills have always been changing, and people have preferences to which ones look best. And this is the simple reason people talk about Sonic's quills so much. But for some reason, there's a lot of people that really don't like that. I mean, you can pull up any somewhat popular post talking about them, and it's almost always guaranteed that you'll find tons of people in the replies dunking on them for it. It doesn't matter. Who cares? Sonic fans lose their minds when the quills are 2 centimeters too short. It's a strange phenomenon we've got here. In some of the less mean scenarios, it's just strange that there's so many people who are allegedly apathetic towards it but feel the need to weigh in. That's like not caring about football, but then buying a ticket to a football game and then telling everyone there that you don't care about football. Like, if you don't care, then just keep scrolling and let the people who do care discuss. But at its worst, a lot of people seem to just straight up insult those who do care. It feels like a taboo subject, with people belittling others for nitpicking. Listen, I could maybe see it if it were something like the texture of Sonic's shoe buckle that fans were constantly analyzing. Like, yeah, who cares, it's pretty much meaningless. But I really don't think Sonic's quills are an unreasonable thing to care about. I mean, they're arguably one of the most important features of his character design. So yeah, I completely disagree with the "it doesn't matter" sentiment. Because character design affects how we perceive a character, whether we consciously realize it or not. Different shapes instinctually trigger different subconscious emotions associated with that shape in our brains. For example, a character made up of circles tends to feel soft, friendly, and non-threatening, like Kirby or Mickey Mouse. Squares represent sturdiness, reliability, and sometimes stubbornness. Characters like Wreck-It Ralph or Heavy from Team Fortress 2 feel more grounded and strong because of their blockier silhouettes. Meanwhile, triangles, with their sharp points and dynamic angles, often signal speed, danger, or aggression. Think someone like Maleficent or Darth Vader. Here, let's test it for ourselves. Even without any knowledge of something like, say, Transformers, most people could take one look at these two symbols and immediately recognize which one represents the heroes and which the villains. It's almost instinctual. Sonic's quills are another perfect example of instinctual shape language. For example, if they were shaped like cubes instead of pointy cones, it would completely change how we interpret him as a character. Instead of looking fast, sharp, and rebellious, he'd come across as blocky, rigid, and clunky, traits that go completely against the essence of Sonic's design. Sonic's quills aren't just some random aesthetic choice, they serve a purpose. Notice how they aren't pointing forward or sticking out wildly. They're always pointing backwards. Why? Well, my friend, it's all because they serve a symbolic purpose, aka symbolic character design. This is when a visual element on a character is used to represent an abstract idea or concept. We can find a perfect example in another character from Sonic the Hedgehog with Knuckles. His innate design has him wielding huge studded fists, so there's no way you'd look at this guy and be like, you know what, I bet this guy's all about arts and crafts. No, this dude was born to punch boulders, not cross-stitch a heartfelt message to his grandma. Take one look at the shape of him and you just know someone's about to get absolutely decked. And that's exactly what symbolic character design is. It communicates his core trait or role without saying anything. In Sonic's case, his quills represent speed. Everything from the shape, the flow, and even the color. They're shaped in a way that makes it look like wind is constantly blowing through them, like his hair is getting pushed back because he's always moving forward. It's a simple but genius way to visually communicate speed through his design. And unlike other spiky-haired characters whose hair sticks out in all directions, Sonic's quills are intentional. They're smooth, streamlined, and naturally flow in a way that matches his fast, slick movement. And I think even down to the blue color, it represents the sky or wind, freedom. But Sonic's quills aren't just about speed. They represent who he is as a character. Their sharp, jagged shape gives him an edge, both literally and figuratively. They make him look cool, rebellious, and different from your standard friendly platformer mascot that you would have found at the time. Also, his quills serve a functional purpose on top of all of this. He's a hedgehog after all. His quills aren't just his hair, they're his weapon. They let him roll into a ball, use his spin dash, and turn his own body into an attack. Everything about Sonic's quills, from their shape, to their direction, to their length, reinforces our perception of him. I really hate when people act so smug and dismissive towards people talking about character design. Saying it doesn't matter or who cares is ignorance. No, really. It's straight up a lack of education on how art works. And I think that's where my biggest frustrations lie. It always starts with people discussing character design. Artists discussing art. That's what this is at the end of the day. Then, non-artists come in and shame them for doing so. It's annoying when this happens because not only is it unnecessary, they're objectively wrong. And it's actually extremely ironic. Even if they don't understand character design and why it matters, they're still subconsciously affected by it and they don't even realize it. These same people, if you were to change certain aspects of Sonic's character design, would subconsciously interpret Sonic differently. If you change the shape language, you change what the design is communicating. Also, I think even though they say they don't care, they actually do care and they just don't realize it. And that's exactly why it's ignorance. An opinion I have, and I know a lot of other people have, is that Sonic's current design with the shorter quills doesn't communicate his speed as effectively. It works with classic Sonic since the rest of his proportions are stubbier, but with the lankier modern Sonic, you'd also expect his quills to be a bit more lanky. It's a small critique, but a critique nonetheless. One coming from the perspective of an artist talking about shape language and character design. However, I've noticed it's not uncommon for fans to take critiques against the series or character as a personal attack towards themselves. I've been in the fandom for a hot second, and one of the biggest things I found to be true after all this time is that a lot of Sonic fans tend to have a somewhat parasocial relationship with the character. It's weird. It makes it hard to critique a lot of things in the series, even if it's coming from a place of analysis. Because people are so quick to jump to the defense over the smallest of things. But here's the thing I don't think a lot of people realize. Critiques are completely normal in the world of art. In fact, they're necessary to understand art better. If you've ever taken an art class, you're probably familiar with critique sessions. These sessions help students turn their thoughts into words and to break down what they think works, what feelings a piece gives off, and what could be improved. It's not about nitpicking for no reason. Learning to critique a piece of art is extremely important in the world of art. And this is what's happening when we see artists break down the design of Sonic. They're simply artists being artists. Sonic's quills are just one aspect of his character design. And there are many more aspects of Sonic's character design that artists like discussing. The shade of blue, his shoes, the curvature of his muzzle, the way his ears are. And the sad thing is, you'll often find this same dismissive attitude as a response to any of these innocent design discussions. But guess what? Just like the quills, they all matter and contribute to Sonic's character, whether they realize it or not. They all factor into why Sonic looks and feels the way he does. And yet, the question remains, do any of these topics even matter? Well, at least in my opinion, of course they do. That's like saying character design doesn't matter. And I know for a fact that Sonic fans care about character design. Just look at how the entire internet collectively bullied Paramount into redesigning Movie Sonic. If character design didn't matter, no one would have complained, the redesign never would have happened, and we definitely wouldn't be 3 movies in. Look, if you really don't care to have a discussion about Sonic's quills, then don't. But don't shame others who do. Because even if you don't care, it does matter and it does affect you. Character design affects how you perceive a character, whether you realize it or not. I mean, just look at these guys.